We continue in 2 Samuel 17 today, as after Hushai's counsel has been accepted by Absalom and the elders, immediately, without even any narrative intervention, Hushai is already back with David's people, the priests Zadok and Abiathar, offering advice on how David can win the battle with Absalom, who's going to be on his way down to the Jordan to meet David's army. So as you can see on the right side of the screen, we've been going over in this section of 2 Samuel 15 to 18 some elements of the style of this section, these three interpretive options, and the shape of the story. And now we're down to this point here, as you see in the magenta. We had been alternating between the red for Absalom's side and the purple for David's side, and now the two sides prepare for battle, and soon the battle will ensue. So as we've been noting the range of characters and places, today we'll meet a whole series of Transjordanian supporters of David. And I've been highlighting throughout, while there are more purple ones representing David's people than green ones representing Absalom's people, as you can see here, all Israel is on the side of Absalom and on the side of David, other than the mercenaries, the Gittites and the Cherethites and the Pelethites. It's all a group of individuals who don't seem to have any relationship to each other than loyalty to David. So how David has picked up all these people along the way, we don't know for sure. We recall that near the end of 1 Samuel, just as Saul was about to be dead, David spread spoils around to various places to try to build up his own loyalty among people, and now perhaps that's what we're seeing here. We're also going to see a whole series of elements on the map, because we're starting in Jerusalem, but we're going to end up in Mahanaim over here, and eventually the battle is going to take place in something called the Forest of Ephraim, which confuses scholars, because as you can see on the map, Ephraim is over here, but the battle is going to be over here. And as you can see from this Google map picture of the Jordan Valley, there's not exactly forests in that area. So when we get to that in chapter 18, we'll have to look a little more closely at that as we go. So in addition, let's look at the key words. And as I've been noting throughout this section, I wouldn't download this from radicalbible.net until we complete this section, because there's almost always more I find later. But as we'll see in our section today, this a nice little chiasm framed around, again, as we saw earlier in this unit of 15 to 18, the passing over as David left Jerusalem and went to the Mount of Olives and back. So we saw the Hebrew word there, ever, here for Passover, and we see it a number of times here, framing this chiasm. And then in the B parts of the chiasm is the mention of Jonathan and Ahimaaz, the sons of the priests Zadok and Abiathar. And then in the middle is this little boy who's a spy on behalf of Absalom, and the woman on the side of David who covers the well and hides Jonathan and Ahimaaz until they can get away. And then it frames with the Passover. So we see that little chiasm there. And we see Passover throughout, and then we'll see other keywords as we go. But mostly we see son and kings and such, because not only is Absalom the son, but we see a whole other series of sons, including Ahimaaz and Jonathan, the sons of the priests. Because so much of this is about fathers and sons, and of course the very succession in the normal sense, not in the specific sense of 1 Samuel 8 that Yahweh picks and the people approve, but in the normal dynastic sense of the king is succeeded by his son, one of his sons or daughters, if you're watching the HBO show Succession, but that's in the modern world, certainly not in the ancient world. So it won't be surprising that a number of sons are what's going on here. So with that on the screen, let's jump right into our passage here. As Fackelman notes below, it is striking that Hushai does not report how much approval his war plan has received. He is acting entirely for David's safety and on the basis of the most unfavorable case, that is, that Ahithophel's plan might still be accepted. As a good secret agent, he excludes from the outset any risk that he can. And we note that in favor of what will be coming later is the sense that Ahithophel's counsel has been accepted, but of course it hasn't, and Ahithophel, spoiler alert, will commit suicide when he realizes that's the case. But we should already know that, because if we go back up a verse earlier, we saw that Absalom and all the men of Israel said out loud, as far as we know, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. And that's all we hear there. It doesn't say specifically that they've decided to follow it, but certainly that judgment implies that they're going to follow it, and that's certainly what they do. Ahithophel will not be gathering 12,000 to lead the battle. Absalom will be in the midst, as Hushai suggested. So here comes Hushai to tell the priest what to do and to send the message. And as we were noting earlier, when David on the Mount of Olives sent the priest back there, this was to set up the very scene we're seeing here with this messenger situation. But it's a very challenging thing because the distance here from Jerusalem across even to Jericho is 8 hours by foot. Maybe people could walk faster in the ancient world, and we don't know if they're not on donkeys, although it doesn't say they're on donkeys. It just says they're going quickly. So it would take a long time, but could they go faster than the armies that are following them? It's not clear, but as we'll see, the message does get there. So let's go back to where we were. Hushai said to the priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and of course we don't know where they are in Jerusalem. At the moment, Absalom and all his people have occupied Jerusalem, so is there some little corner? And Jerusalem at the time of David certainly was much smaller than the modern Jerusalem if you've ever been there as a tourist. The so-called city of David is just a tiny piece of the current city of Jerusalem, although it's hard to investigate archaeologically because it's in the midst of a populated city and it can't be dug up. But certainly it was a small place, and so the idea that the priests could be hiding there without Absalom and his men knowing, perhaps they don't even recognize them. Their pictures aren't up on the internet somewhere, but we don't know. So he summarizes, thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel. And I want to highlight that here, not all Israel or the men of Israel, but the elders of Israel. So let's look a little bit at the role of elders of Israel. The Hebrew word zaken, which literally means graybeard, so it's a specifically male term, elder, found 180 times in the Masoretic text, but the phrase elders of Israel is 31 times, and you see how it's distributed here. So it's not very many times, but it's in the books of Samuel 6 times total, and in the book of Kings, when Solomon, as you can see below, gathers them up to approve of his celebration of the inauguration of the temple. So just going through the uses in our immediate passages, we saw the elders of Israel questioned, let's bring the ark up, when they were routed by the Philistines back in 1 Samuel, and they're the ones who gather together and demand from Samuel a king. So this whole monarchy was the elders of Israel's idea in the first place. Abner appealing to them after Saul is dead, hoping that he can be the successor to Saul there. But of course we know that's not what happened. Joab ends up killing him. Then the elders of Israel are precisely those who come and make David king at Hebron, and he makes a covenant with them. Now we get to our immediate previous scene where the advice pleased Absalom, as we saw in the elders of Israel, and now we get to our scene here. We'll see it in 1 Kings when Solomon tries to get them on his side, but they will not be on his side because afterwards there'll be a rebellion. Although the rebellion will not be described as led by the elders of Israel, but the whole assembly, the Quahal of Israel, as we'll see when we get to 1 Kings. Meanwhile, Rehoboam took counsel with the elders of Judah there and then doesn't listen to them. So that's the role of elders throughout. And now Hushai is saying that the elders of Israel have agreed to follow whose counsel here? He hasn't said. He said Ahithophel's counsel and I've counseled, but he didn't say whose counsel was accepted. And that's the point that was noting in the previous previous note, that he hasn't told them. So he therefore says, send quickly, and as my note below has, the priests are to send someone else to their sons, but that person is not named, because he's sending, he's going to send their sons, but via a servant girl. So let's look more closely at the details there. Send quickly, and we can see the word for quickly, meharaz, 3 times in this immediate scene, highlighting that after the stately procession, as it was narrated with many repetitions of words, and it seemed to be slowly leaving Jerusalem and going to the Mount of Olives, now everything moves into high gear. So send quickly and tell David, do not lodge. I'm using the word lon there. We see it a few times earlier, and it was focused 11 times in Judges 19, which is the horrible story of the rape of the concubine and the punishment of the Benjaminites, Saul and his family being Benjaminites, so maybe there's an echo of that there. But the immediate situation is telling David to find a place of safety, because Hushai assumes Absalom knows where he's going to be. So do not lodge at the fords of the wilderness, which if we go back to 15:28, we recall David said, that's where I will wait until the word comes. Now the word has come. But by all means cross over, which is to highlight the doubling here that we can see. But pass over, yes, pass over. Otherwise the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. And that's literally what the word means, to be swallowed up. Yevolah here. Only Job, anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. So now the movement starts. And as my note below has, a rare moment when the chain of secret messaging is brought fully out, and it appears as a pattern, as we'll continue to see. So Jonathan and Ahimaaz, whom we were told earlier, the sons of the priest, we don't need to be reminded of that here, were waiting at En Rogel, which is just outside of Jerusalem, as the note has here. A spring, maybe 30-minute walk, according to Google Maps, as you can see from this map right here, just a short walk out of town so they won't be seen. Literally, they were standing there, as you can see on my translation on the right. And a servant girl used to go tell them. And notice how she's parallel with the woman at the house. Two women protect them here. So the servant girl, Ashipahah, as the woman of Tekoa describing herself, and not elsewhere in 2 Samuel. As Bodder notes, we assume she's taking a considerable risk in this undertaking, and no doubt about that. So used to go and tell them, and they would go and tell King David. So it seems that the message is going from the priests in the city to the servant girl in the city who went to En Rogel to tell them, and they would run the 8 hours, apparently, to go tell King David. And it sounds like it's a pattern here. They would go and tell, like this has been a repeated thing, although this is the only time we're actually hearing it happening. For they could not risk, or literally because it could not endure or prevail being seen entering the city. It's not so much about risk as it is about being able to actually get something done. But just when it looks like David's side has got the spies and the messengers to get the message across, they're spotted. So as Bottom notes below, in 2 Samuel 17, 18, and 19, the similarities with Joshua too are palpable, with Rahab in the role of the woman. So let's look briefly at that here, and we see. So the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and she said, "True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came. When it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them." And she had hid them amongst the flax. And so we see the similarity with that here. And certainly that's meant to be recalled that now David and his people are in line with the original settlers in the land over against the Canaanites, positioning Absalom and his people as if they're the local Canaanites. So in our immediate scene, the boy saw them and told Absalom, and so both of them went quickly. Absalom and the boy came to the house of a man at Baharim. Why there? I'm sorry, this is not, both of them went away quickly, not the boy and Absalom, but the 2 sons of the priest. It's confusing even to me, and I'm trying to present it to you. So those 2, the sons, came to the house of Baharim, which we saw earlier was a place of Shammai, a Benjaminite, who was taunting David, and then we'll see it again in that same sense. So it would seem like enemy country, and yet he seems to have an ally there, who has a well in his courtyard, and it seems like the boys must have known about it, because it's all prepared. They went down to the well, and the man's woman took a covering and stretched it over. And we see the similarity there. Simply the woman. It doesn't say the man's woman. So it's the man and the woman there. And notice how similar this is to Michal's covering of David, down to the literal words, as we'll see in just a moment. So the word for the covering is hamasak here, only here in the Deuteromistic history. She stretched it out over the well's mouth, or literally on the face of the well, as you can see on the right side of the screen, and spread out grain over it, rephoth, and nothing else was known. So now Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, apparently not Absalom, and we don't know if it's the original boy. And how they know he was here, we don't know, because the little boy who ran off to tell Absalom, as you can see in verse 18, didn't know where they were going, but they figured it out somehow. And when they came to the woman at the house, where the man was, we don't know, and they asked the direct question, "Where are they?" And the woman said, "They have crossed over the brook of water." And here, the particular phrase uses the Hebrew Michal. Only here is an impersonal noun in the Masoretic text as the brook, not the water, Hamayim. And as Falkman notes, it's an allusion to David's escape, and we surprisingly discover in verse 21e below that this is recommended with the key words crossing over and water, and as we see here. And the crossing over is 3 verses in a row. So a specific reference to the Michal situation, not because of the crossing over the water, but because the covering over, just as Michal covered over David with the animal skins. And so it works again, just as it worked against Saul. And when they had searched and could not find him, they returned to Jerusalem. So now they get to leave, and the perspective shifts back to David. So after they had gone, the men came out of the well and went and told King David, as my note below, highlighting what I've been saying, the 9-hour journey to the Jordan. And they told King David, notice now as in the full title, King David, even though immediately the narrator simply says they said to David right after, and the narrator refers simply to David below. But for the moment, it's to King David. And they said to him, go and cross the water quickly, or literally stand up. And we notice the parallel standing up. They're telling him to stand up, he will stand up, and Ahithophel standing up to kill himself in just another verse or so. So, cross the water quickly. As Falkman notes, as Shimei's death taunts, recalled by the reference to Bahurim, as I just noted, were symbolized by dry dust and stones. Now David's escape and restored life is symbolized by water. Falkman recalling that Shimei threw stones and then dusted dust, stones and dusted dust at David from the side of the road. And for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you. And notice that's still implying the idea that they're going to follow Ahithophel's counsel. Why would that message come across? Assumingly, this message is from Hushai. But he hasn't. Hushai didn't say that Absalom's going to follow Ahithophel's counsel. He simply said, this is Ahithophel's counsel. Why would he not say what his own counsel was? Why does he want to mislead them into thinking that Ahithophel is going to be at the center of the army rather than Absalom? That much isn't clear, and I've not seen any commentator that seems to have a good explanation for that little detail. So we'll just continue a couple more verses here. So the delay here has enabled David to take advantage of the cover of darkness to make his escape in what seems to be one long day, especially if they were journeying 8 hours to get there. So David and all the people who were with him set out. And as Graham Auld notes, David acts quickly at night without waiting to see whether Absalom will in the end take Hushai's advice or Ahithophel's. Either way, he would have to do the same thing, right? And we'll see what he does once we get to chapter 18. Maybe he had that plan all along regardless. So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan, literally stood up yet again, as we see. And crossing the Jordan, the irony would not have been lost on anybody, crossing back the other direction, undoing the Joshua story of the symbolic entry into the Jordan with the stones in the river. As Baden notes below, shifted the field of battle out of Israel into a terrain that David knew better than anyone. As we'll see next time, he has friends over there who will provide provision. So they crossed the Jordan by daybreak. No one was left who had not crossed. So seemingly they did it during the night. And so we'll end our scene here with Ahithophel's very orderly suicide. Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed. We have to ask, where did he see it from? He must have seen it from Jerusalem, but we haven't seen it. Certainly he's not being let out, and that's all we can know here. So as my note below has, no longer listened to in the house of Absalom and unable to return to David, Ahithophel's life is ruined. As Falkman notes, the way in which all this is narrated makes 1723 one of the most impressive jewels of biblical narrative art. As Pinsky adds, the terms his house, his city, his household, his father enforce from a new direction that this is an upheaval of domestic as well as national forces. And then Badr notes the parallel with Abraham in Genesis 22:3, including saddle his donkey, and only Numbers 22:21 elsewhere, and we'll see a similarity with Barzillai in 1937. But there's another similarity if you're a New Testament reader, as we'll see in just a moment. When he saw that he was not followed, literally his counsel was not made, he saddled his donkey, like Abraham, went off home to his own city, literally stood up and went, as you see on the right side, and hanged himself. And notice how similar that is to Matthew 27:5, the description of Judas doing exactly the same thing. An insider betrayer of David or the son of David commits suicide near the Mount of Olives. And from this perspective, we might want to ask, although we might think of Judas as doing it for the money, and Matthew, he threw the money away, and in the end, perhaps he was like Ahithophel. Perhaps he had offered Jesus advice, as Katsantzakis interprets it in The Last Temptation of Christ, to be the kind of Messiah that Peter and so many wanted, to be the Messiah, ironically here, like David. But Jesus won't be like his titular ancestor and is a different kind of father and listens to the advice of God and the Holy Spirit rather than the advice of Judas. So both Judas and Ahithophel are portrayed, at least according to Matthew, as hanging themselves when their advice to the David or the son of David is not heard. And he was buried in the tomb of his father. And as Falkman notes, he thus prevents the ignominious and unsung disappearance of his mortal remains after an execution, as in the "do not let him go down down to the grave, or Sheol, in peace, allotted to Shammai and Joab in 1 Kings 2, and David's deathbed orders to Solomon. So now it's clear whose counsel is being taken. David will go to Mahanaim, and Absalom cross the Jordan, and the battle is just about set. We'll look at who the leaders are and how the two opponents set their armies before the final battle takes place. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.